I'm Amanda, and this is Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Well, hello there, friends. Thank you so much for being here today. I have Scott Culley of Scott Culley Designs on the show today. Again, I know I found his work at QuiltCon 2024 in Raleigh. I'm not even ashamed to keep bringing it up. Um, but he made a really incredible piece called Shadow. If you haven't seen it, go try and check it out. Um, and we get to talking about it a little bit, but I was just so interested to learn about his background and how he came from architecture into quilting and how, he calls himself an upcycled architect. And I just thought that was so clever. And yeah, I'm just really excited for you guys to hear this conversation and get to know Scott more and go check out his work. He makes really incredible quilts. So I hope you enjoy this episode and let's get into it. Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here. I, like probably a lot of your newer followers this year, found your work at QuiltCon and was just stunned and in awe. So this is really exciting to finally get to talk to you about all the things. So
Great. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
yeah, it's great. Well, so just like everybody else who pops on the show, we're going to start by me asking you how you even got into the quilting world before we get to all your other architecture and quilt
Uh,
design and art. So,
Well, my quilting journey it's been a little weird. So my mother always sewed and she did our Halloween costumes and she, repaired stuff here. And it wasn't like a huge seamstress, but I mean, she had a sewing machine in our house. And um, so when I was little, I saw it as this, oh, this is a cool machine with needles and stuff that I can like put fabric together and kind of make stuff with it. So I
yeah.
didn't do anything super crazy as a kid. I think I made a pillow or, something like that. Um, and then as I got into college and just started kind of wanting to be creative in different ways. I was going to school for architecture, so there's plenty of chances to be created with cardboard and stuff like that to build stuff, but
Mhm.
to do anything else, so I was looking for that avenue. I started making sock monkeys.
Oh,
And I thought, oh, that'd be really cool if I made sock monkeys, but out of like dress socks, out of these, because like the real flashy dress socks were like the new thing. And
yeah.
um, so I started making sock monkeys out of these cool, crazy dress socks. And so I did that for a while and got a little tiny sewing machine to be able to do that. And then it moved on from there. I started making like messenger bags out of men's suits
Mm,
and started making other types of like tote bags out of like laminated paper and newspaper and magazines and stuff like that. So just really kind of um, pulling stuff from other areas and sewing them together.
mhm.
Um, and then I was doing a house renovation for a woman, and I was up in her house taking measurements one day, and she's like, "Come here, I want to show you what I'm doing." And so she took me into her sewing room, and she was making a memory quilt. She
Mhm.
had all of her mom's clothes stacked up, and she was making this beautiful quilt out of clothes. Absolutely blew me away. I thought that was a cool. I'd never heard of it, such a thing. I've always heard of quilting, of course, but I've never heard of like a memory quilt.
Mhm.
And this just hit me in a couple different directions because I was doing a thesis for my architecture final as far as how you physically represent memory and the things you do to remember things.
Mm,
And so this was just fitting right in with everything that was going on in my head at the time and just thought it was really cool.
yeah.
Um, and also my mom has a lot of clothes.
Mm,
And that idea of but they were always very specific because she had, certain clothes that she wore for church. She had certain clothes, she'd wear for work. So it's like you knew what that piece was.
yeah.
And you had tangible memories from this piece of fabric and or this button style. It's like, oh, that's from that jacket that she wore. Da, da, da. Da. And it was
Yeah.
yeah. So it like ticked a lot of these like um dopamine boxes in my head that's like, okay, this is really cool.
Yeah.
Um So then fast forward, I took a traditional quilting class and I learned how to do like a 9 patch baby blanket and stitch in the ditch and do all that stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, is this what it is? Okay, well, never mind. I'll go do
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah.
And so then, I mean, it was interesting. I kind of learned the real kind of techniques of how to cut and how to measure fabric and do all that. But like I said, just the imagery and the end product was kind of like, oh, all right. So then, step another big fast forward more years, and I stumbled upon some pixel quilts.
Mm,
I'm like, oh, this is cool. Okay, now I can start to look at and see, oh, I can start to put my own imagery, things that I want to see in quilts, um, in on there by doing pixel quilts and stuff. So I learned how to do that, and I made after the birth of our son, we we were living in Stockholm at the time, and
okay.
I can circle back to all that,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Yeah.
um, and so our son was born in the U.S. We were living in Stockholm, so I stayed in the U.S. with him at some friend's house while we were getting taking care of all the legal stuff, getting passports and court documents because
Sure.
we adopted him from New York.
Hmm.
And um, so, as a thank you gift to our friends that we stayed with, who were Latin American, then big Lucha Libre fans,
Mm.
I made them two giant Lucha Libre mask pixel quilts for their
Oh,
kids as like a big, huge thank you that we got to stay there for a couple months.
yeah.
And I'm like, all right, it's pretty cool. Now what can I do? Can I make the pixel smaller? Can I, how do I make the picture more defined? And as I was kind of like looking at different sewing techniques, how do you do this? How do you do this? I found there was a YouTube show called Man Sewing
Mm.
with Rob Appel.
Hmm.
And he was kind he's got tattoos and he's like, yeah, no, this is how you do free motion quilting. And this is, and he would do kind of cool stuff. And so, but I was picking up little tips and whatnot of things to do. And then he had Violet Craft on.
Yeah.
And Violet Craft, master at paper piecing.
Yeah.
And just it blew me away because it's like, oh, wait a minute. Now I could do something really cool with this.
Yeah.
So then I start, looking up paper piecing and but then I got this book and it's, butterflies and
Hmm.
it's sheep and horses and I'm like, okay, again, not my imagery.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so now I got to teach myself how to do a design, how to do my own design
Yeah.
and do something really cool. So that spawned my first FPP piece, which was Marilyn Monroe, kind of
Hmm.
the Andy Warhol interpretation of the Marilyn Monroe portrait.
Yeah.
Um, and my husband liked it, my family liked it. Everyone was like, "Wow, that's really cool. You did that, with fabric, really?" Like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah." Like, well, what are you gonna do next? What are you gonna do next? So then it got a little bit bigger, and I did this giant. I guess it was like a, big enough for like a twin size bed, but of a sugar skull.
Hmm.
And I mean, my sewing, my quilting stinks. There, the
Yeah.
Marilyn Monroe quilt, it's got skip stitches. There's a couple birds' nests on the back, and it's I
Mm.
mean, it's a mess.
Sure.
But so, as we all know, as you keep doing it, you get a little bit better, you get a little bit better, and you start to
Yeah.
get a little bit more control. And so I started posting these on Instagram, and there was a gal um, in Germany they're in the kind of southern, more towards Munich side,
Uh-huh.
and she was like, "Your stuff is kind of cool. You should think about submitting this in the QuiltCon. I mean,
Hmm.
they really need to see this different type of stuff you're doing."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Really? You think, because I'd always heard about, oh, it's going into quilt shows and like, oh, they're going to
Yeah.
judge you real harshly and tell you your binding is an eighth of an inch off and,
Yeah.
stuff like that." And I'm like, "Oh, I can't handle that kind of critique at this stage."
Yeah.
Uh, and I feel like that's a lot of people kind of get that
Yeah,
instinct and don't submit because they're timid about what the judges might say or if they get in or not or whatever.
right.
So I had just finished a giant luchador quilt um, right before the deadline, and this was before COVID,
Okay.
um, and it didn't get in. So I was like, okay, I'm not
You
surprised.
tried. You
I
tried.
tried. I
Yeah.
tried.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then it was QuiltCon together because of the pandemic. And then the
Right.
year after that, I had done, I don't know how many I'd done after that, maybe one or two more. And it was the blue luchador, the square one,
Hmm.
and that one got in.
Okay.
So I was like, "Wow, cool. All
Nice.
right." Um, and so that's kind of how it got started, and it was kind of snowballed from there, of course.
Sure.
But
Sure.
yeah, it's funny how just the different events in your life just kind of dictate kind of creatively how things happen, and so
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, like who knows if you were like never doing your architecture stuff and like working in that lady's house, like would you have ever seen a memory quilt? Would you have ever seen somebody using clothing to create like preserve memories? Like,
yeah,
it's just like what those questions you ask yourself, like, oh, if I had never done this and I would never would have done that, then that wouldn't have happened. It's like, yeah, that snowball effect is
yeah,
really
yeah.
interesting. But that's so cool. And like, I love that you grew up with like such a creative, curious mind and like wanting to just like make fun stuff. And I think it's the kind of a common theme of people who grew up in like a crafty household or with like a parent who could sew or like do
Yeah.
something crafty. It's like you get this idea in your head that like you can do anything. And so like people say, "Oh, I could never make that." But then us, we're a special breed. We go, "I could make that." Like
Yeah, and that you know that and that's kind of in the same thing because yeah, once in a while I'll see an image or I'll see it, you'll see a painting or something like that. At least that's what I'm doing now. I saw this guy's paintings and
yeah.
I'm like, I bet I could do that in fabric,
Right. Right.
and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, give it a shot, it's
Yeah. Like why
because
not?
at the end of the day, I kind of came to this realization that it's just flat color
Yeah.
and color pieces move, and it's just how you put them together. And if you can put them together successfully and still make the image work, it's just flat color next to flat color. So it's nothing it's nothing crazy,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. I think when you have the mechanics behind it or you know how things go together too, like you can demystify a lot of the like, oh my gosh, how did they even make that? It's so funny. Like I'll find myself looking at like a quilt block and like finding where the seams join and like I'm like,
yeah,
oh, I see where they started and how they like added the pieces on after that. Cause like, and when I first started, I would see quilts and be like, what the heck? I don't even know how they made that.
right,
But now I can like follow the seams and like figure out
exactly.
how
Start
it
to
was
break it
built.
apart and be like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that's how they
Yeah.
constructed it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So like that like change in thinking is kind of cool because it almost helps you in other ways too, right? Like I'm sure like your architecture knowledge and experience informs your quilting and construction of fabric experience and like how things can go together and structurally be sound, like unless
you.
that's crazy, but
No, that makes sense. Where I found my architecture training comes in is the basically how I create my patterns and the documentation of my patterns and stuff like
okay.
that. And how I can pull things apart and be able to put them back together again.
Yeah.
Um, with my patterns now, I know where my faults are, so
Mm,
I kind of design around them, so I don't have to not showcase them, but I don't have to I can just work around my what I consider my faults now is maybe my points aren't exactly lining up or whatever. Well, the blue quilt that was at QuiltCon, I had designed it in a way such that I never had to really you would never notice if a point was off because all the points are all the same color.
mm,
So
yeah.
unless you really got your face into it, but it's not going to be a glaring, dark piece, right
Yeah.
off of a light piece. So you would never find that.
Right.
So I guess just working in that type of area. So
Yeah. Which is kind of cool because when you do have the ability to design your own stuff and you know your limitations or like the things that maybe like where your skills aren't maybe like the best because we
yeah,
all have our own areas, right? Where
sure,
like
most
it's
definitely.
tricky. Like it's kind of nice that you can design around that because then you don't, like you said, you don't have to showcase it or you don't have to hit a frustration point where you don't like doing the thing anymore because you keep bumping up
Because
against this thing,
I keep screwing this one thing up. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool. Okay,
Yeah.
I want to rewind a tiny bit
Okay, please do.
because you started talking about making sock monkeys out of dress socks and then making material like stuff out of like, magazines, newspapers. Like,
Mhm.
well, so what, I guess, what time frame, like when were you making the sock monkeys? And then what kind of years were you making the like upcycled material, like bags and things?
Okay, let's see here. The sock, I kind of have to associate it where I was living. Because that's where I was recreating all this stuff. So it's like
Yeah.
I can see like my workspace and what apartment I was in.
Yeah.
I want to say the sock monkeys were probably like 2006, 2007.
Okay.
And then like the upcycled bags was just straight after that. So probably close
Okay.
to like 2008, 9 in
Okay.
there.
Okay.
Probably took my first quilting class after 2010. We had moved so my husband and I both did our undergrad in Boston.
Okay.
He stayed and did his graduate degree in Boston, in the Boston area.
Hmm.
And then he got a job with the government. So we moved down to Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And so while I was in the DC area, took my quilting class and started
Okay.
to kind of investigate that stuff. Um, but yeah, it wasn't until probably it's here. My son was born in 2017, so probably that's when I started doing the quilting was 17, early 18.
Okay. That's when I
So
started quilting too.
okay, yeah.
That's
So
fun. Uh,
um,
well,
yeah,
yeah, I was curious about the like upcycle material bags because like I just remember being like early college, which was like that kind of 2000
yeah.
between 2004 2009 kind of area. Like, um, and just loving like I had a bag made out of an old Sting record that my friend had found for me. Yeah,
Oh, that's cool.
'cause I'm obsessed. I love Sting so much. Um, and like yeah, just I just remember like that being like, like shredded paper being remade into like new materials and like epoxied and then, hard side bags made out of it. And like I just
Uh,
remember like that being the thing. And I've always loved that because like you, I was always looking for ways to like upcycle my clothes or like,
yeah,
you know, reuse things because like we didn't have a ton of money when I was growing up. And so my mom did sew a lot and like I could repurpose clothes or I could like reimagine them and she'd help me because it was a way for her to not buy me new stuff. We could go
right,
buy
right.
$3 a yard fabric back when it used to be reasonably
Yeah.
priced. And, it was Joanne, so whatever. But then she could, she helped me kind of like well, I don't want to say elongate. That's not the word I'm looking for.
But make it live longer.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like give
Yeah. Or
my
give it a second
wardrobe,
life.
yeah,
Yeah.
like give my wardrobe more longevity. That's what I was looking
Yeah.
for. So anyway, that's why I had that question because I was like, this sounds like early 2000s me. Which I love because it's so cool. And like the idea of like sock monkeys out of like the crazy dress socks, because yeah, it was that time too, right? Like
Yeah.
where it
Yeah.
was like, ooh, look at all these like, oh, there was a brand of like ties that they sold at Macy's or was it Bon Marché still then? I don't know, at Macy's, but they were like just like these wild colors and prints. And
Yeah.
like one of my friends worked there as a sales
They had
associate.
I remember, so I grew up in Eastern Washington. So
Okay.
we had Bon Marché as well.
Yeah.
And I remember that they had like, well, they had Beatles ties. And so it was like the
Yeah.
covers of all the Beatle albums and stuff
Hmm.
like that. And so just, yeah, the crazy ties and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That
But,
time was wild. But anyway, okay. So then you went to architecture school and so I noticed that you call yourself an upcycled architect. So like obviously harkening back to your early crafting days, like you were recycling and upcycling materials. So like how does that work into architecture, I guess? Like what does that mean?
Well, I think what I'm trying to get across with that is that I'm trained as an architect. I've
Hmm.
been doing architectural drawing and drafting since I was like 13 in high school.
Yeah.
And so just taking everything that I've learned from architecture school and working in the industry and stuff and making that into, a quilter or, a craft person or however you want to
Yeah.
classify it. So just kind of I think that's what I mostly mean is like taking the skills that I learned before for a certain task, but then
Yeah.
reusing them for something else.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
yeah,
That's kind of what I took from it, but I don't like to
yeah.
assume. And since I could ask you, I mean, why not? No, I love that because I think I've talked about it a few times on here, just like how you never know like where your past experiences or like your your learned skills or like your
Mhm.
acquired degrees or things are gonna like lead you and like how you can use them in different ways. Like I
Yeah.
have a teaching degree, but I'm not teaching, but I also feel like I have skills and a different self-confidence than I had before that that like is helping me do what I do now, like
Yeah, most
learning
definitely.
what kind of questions to ask or like, talking to people in front of people because like I kids are fine, but like I get in front of adults and I get sweaty. So it's fine. But anyway, it's just interesting like to think about that, like how where you are now and like when you were earning that degree, did you necessarily see yourself in your shoe where you're at now? Or like could you see that path to that?
Oh no, not at all. And even when I started quilting, I had no idea or ambition to be where I am now,
Yeah.
so everything's kind of been a surprise. And I took a break from when I while we were so kind of back to my timeline. Uh, my husband got seconded to the Swedish government, so that's why we moved to Stockholm. So he was working for USAID, and he got seconded to their version of their governmental aid department.
Okay.
Um, and so we had a young daughter at the time, and then while we were in Stockholm, our son was born in New York, and so we adopted him.
Hmm.
But during that time in Stockholm, um, the office I was at in DC it wasn't the healthiest place to work. So I was just like, I'm done. I don't need to
Yeah.
do this anymore.
Yeah.
And while we were in Stockholm, I really didn't have to. So I could just focus on the kids and, kind of doing some sort of crafting stuff and
Mhm.
creative stuff. Um,
Is it Sweden a place that like that has like a lot of support for like new families, like when you bring a baby home, like, or is it different when you're like an expat and you're adopting outside of the country kind of thing?
it's different when you don't pay taxes. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah, if
Okay.
we were taxpayers, they oh my gosh, the family leave in Stockholm, I think it's like
Is it like a year?
it's like 4 years.
What the
And you
heck?
can take it up until they go to like first grade. So, and that's for like not both parents combined, but I think both parents get that
Yeah.
because I knew some people that were like, oh yeah, I'm taking a year off here. I'm taking, you know,
Okay. So they could
so
kind of
it's,
go in and out.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Dang, that's so nice.
yeah, yeah,
If
yeah.
only.
Here in Germany, I want to say it's like 2 years or a year and a half or something like that.
Okay. Still like
Uh,
better than the 6 weeks if you're lucky here in the
if you're
States.
lucky, yeah, yeah,
Good lord. Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah,
that was just a pop that popped in my head because I was like,
yeah.
"Ooh, I wonder if you got like," because you see in like Finland and stuff, they like every new family gets like a box that's like turns into
Right.
like a
A bed that
bassinet and yeah,
the
and like
kid can, yeah.
diapers and clothes and it's like all these things. And so I was
Yeah.
just curious, but
I don't know if Sweden does the box system, but like Iceland and Finland and
yeah,
places like that, they do that.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, as
interesting.
far as family leave and, you know, healthcare and all that, it's fantastic. So
Okay. So you had taken kind of a break when you were like move like when you were moving there, or did you like
Yeah,
just
when
stop
I
altogether while you were there?
yeah, because I moved and I was like, to this office, I'm like, see you later. I'm not,
Yeah.
working for you anymore. And then it was like, I don't want to work in any architecture firm anymore. So then it was kind of this like, what do I do now?
Hmm.
Um, so really kind of trying to figure what that was. And um, I have since I'm back in an architecture firm, but for a firm that I worked with in Boston.
Okay.
Um, and it's been fantastic. So it's really the people you work with
Hmm.
that really can make or break anything. Um,
Absolutely.
so I was really pleasantly surprised when I went back. So
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, that's cool that you were able to find your way back. I think if you're passionate about something or care about something, yeah, the environment makes such a huge difference. And if you
yeah,
can't, if the people are toxic or you keep finding yourself in like, in relationship, like weirdness that maybe feeds like old habits or triggers
mm,
old feelings. Yeah, I kept finding myself in that situation as a teacher, like just constantly being triggered. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not in my right mind. I'm not healthy. Like, I can't
yeah,
be here like this and help these kids because I can't even help myself at this moment. Like, I keep finding myself in these weird situations with other teachers, but it was like because I kept falling into old patterns, it was just so weird. But anyway,
yeah.
oh, but I'm happy that you were able to find your way back to something that feels good and obviously remote because then now you're in Germany. So how did you end up going from Sweden to Germany?
So so our son was born in February. We finally got done with all the legal stuff, I think like middle of May of that year. So then we went back to Stockholm for the summer, and then my husband's I don't want to call it a tour, but his allotted time for at that job was to be over in end of October, no, early November.
Okay.
Um, and this is when Trump had just taken office, or he'd been in office for a year. He'd been in
Mhm.
office for that year, and there were like governmental shutdowns and just we
Chaos.
yeah, we didn't want to go back to the States because we had two small kids, a newborn, and our daughter would have been 4 at the time.
Mhm.
And I would have had to gone back to work. And I wasn't in a place where, at least architecture wise, I couldn't have done that.
Yeah.
So, and then just childcare is
Right.
insane. Um, so it was like, okay, so let's stay in Europe. Um, and so then it was kind of like going down the list of where do you want to live? It's like, well, okay, London would be cool, but it's too expensive.
Mhm.
France, it's hard to get a job because they're
Mhm.
very protective.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, well, go to Germany. And it's like, yeah. And my husband's best second language is German.
Oh, okay.
And he had when the kids were born, we had decided that he would only speak to the kids in German
Oh,
to kind of get their ears attuned
yeah.
to learning a second language and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, why not? So we went to Berlin for a weekend and it's like, yeah, we could do this. We could live here. This is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Um, and so we found an apartment easily and then just shipped everything over. So,
Nice.
um, yeah, and it's been 7 years. It'll be 7 years in November. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Nice.
and I still don't speak German.
I was gonna say, do you speak German at all? Do you
No,
understand it at least when he's speaking
I
to
can
your children?
I can get by, and the kids like to speak English more than German. So,
Okay.
um, but um, but no, my son goes to a German public school. We moved my daughter over to a bilingual school just because the academics were happened to be better.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean everybody's kind of already pretty well integrated.
Nice.
So
That's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, it's so funny because my youngest stepson, his like through his grandpa on his mom's side, he has a German passport. Like his grandpa was born there, and so then his mom was able to get her a passport, then he was able to get a passport. So he was like going to check out living in Berlin and ultimately decided to just stay home and go to college here for a little
Yeah.
while. He's like, "I can go live in Germany later. Like, I don't need to do it now while I'm 19," like struggling.
Right.
So anyway, but he fell in love with Berlin and that's where he ultimately was like, "That's where I want to go." So that's
Yeah.
so
No,
I want to
Berlin
visit now.
is
I'm like, want to visit because everybody says it's like so great. And I'm like, well, and like my youngest brother and his wife, they loved it there too. They're like, "Oh, Berlin was so cool." And I was like, "Well, I have to go."
well, it's this crazy, crazy dichotomy because Germany is so rigid,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
love their paperwork and they love, just rules.
Yeah.
And but then and the you know, and then in Germany or in Berlin, it has the one of the areas is the largest. I think there's the largest number of kids per capita
Mm.
in all of Europe.
Wow.
And I mean, it's just families, 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 families. There's parks everywhere. There's
Yeah.
tons of stuff for kids to do. There's always camps and stuff like that for them to go to and go and do stuff, and
Yeah.
hacker spaces and all this kind of crazy stuff. Everything's geared towards kids. But then
Yeah.
on the other side, you've got these crazy nightclubs that go from Thursday night to Sunday or Monday morning,
Mm.
and it just and everything in between, and nobody bats an eye, and everybody's fine, and we all
Yeah.
get along and
Just live your life.
live your
Take care of the
life. And
kids.
yeah, we're going to the museum as the guy in leather's coming home, and
Yeah.
so yeah,
That's so
it's
fun.
it's it's a fun place. It's a fun place.
I love that concept of just like letting people be like taking care of the kids like that. I think that's where a lot of spaces in the US like we kind of fail is we don't really take care of our kids as well
Yeah.
as we should. And like there's not a lot of support for families to take care of their kids. And like unless you have a close knit community that you've built yourself, like it's not. So
Yeah, and that's yeah. Without
it's
getting
it's
overly
I know,
political,
right? I know, right?
it's there. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just they're just making it more difficult.
Yeah.
They say it's for families, but you're making it more difficult.
Yeah. It's like then
So
the decisions that get made actually make it harder for families. And it's like stop spewing bullshit.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, but also I think too, like when your basic needs are met, like you can focus on the things that you love, that you will want to do, that
yeah,
your soul, that you're not just like leaving everything at work because you have no more energy for anything else because all you do is work to survive on like
right.
in survival mode constantly. So what was that like to like, did you notice a difference right away, or were you able to kinda ease into that way of kind of like, obviously, like you said, you left architecture because it wasn't healthy, you didn't wanna work, and you didn't really have to in
Mhm.
Sweden, like, was it like, "Heck yes, this is exactly what I wanted it to be," or did it take some time to kinda ease into that new role you were playing?
Well, it took some time because it was, well, I need to fill that hole in with something.
Yeah.
Um, I think so. Towards the end of being in DC and going into Sweden, I had kind of had this side project where, um, when our daughter was born, um, that was kind of a shotgun event. Is that we found out that she had been born, or when we found out about her, she had already been born. So it
Okay.
was mad dash to get everything.
Yeah.
Um, and so, we went into Babies R Us or something like that and looking for baby clothes and stuff like that. And there was nothing, it was all like, I love mommy and, stuff, daddy's little trooper. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. And not that we would expect to have anything catered to, two dads or anything like that, but have
Well, why
something,
not?
have something.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'm gonna make it my own. So I kind of started this, little T-shirt company for kids of, LGBT families, and
Mm,
um, so that was kind of my creative little outlet and trying to manage that and trying to figure out how to do that. And
yeah.
um, I'm not business minded at all, so it didn't really work too well. Um, I'd sold a bunch of stuff, but it was just kind of, all right, it was getting a little too tedious. It's not being as creative as I wanted to be.
Yeah.
Um, but So that was kind of a fun little adventure, but yeah, it was looking for something to fill that hole, that creative hole with. Um, and just trying to see what, throw something to the wall and see what sticks type of mentality and try everything and
Yeah.
see what happens. So
Yeah. Does architecture does it feel like a creative outlet, or is it too
no,
rigid or process oriented for there to be really any creativity outlet there?
there really isn't any, at least in, if I was a designer, yeah,
Mm,
maybe. But that's not my role, and that's not
okay.
the role that I want in a project. I really like getting the design from the designers and trying to put it into document form so the contractor can go out and build it.
Right.
And doing door schedules and doing window schedules and trying to, organize everything so everything can be presented to the contractor so they can go out and buy it and build it.
Okay.
So that's kind of like where I fit in mostly. So there's very little creativity within that. So I needed something else to really, really call my own.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Okay.
the quilting definitely fills that
Yeah.
gap. So
Yeah. Because you are in control of the design there, right?
yeah, I mean,
And
to
the
the nth degree,
organization
and the
and
organizing and the construction and
yeah,
yeah, all that.
all the parts.
So
That's so fun.
yeah.
So, okay, so the piece I saw at QuiltCon 24, I keep saying last year, like QuiltCon last year when it was this year, because guys, that's
Yes.
just how my brain works. It's like I think of it, it's like the school year. It's like I would have seen these kids literally 2 months before and be like, oh, last year when you were in my class last year, or like, oh, last year their data was like this, whatever. And I'm like,
But that was kind of like
I mean, school
scholastically, it was,
year.
yeah, school year, but
So anyway,
yeah,
that's kind of how I'm
yeah,
like, it's like a school year. Anyway, so Raleigh 24
yeah.
is when I saw, is it called Shadow?
Shadow, yes.
Shadow.
Yeah.
And I stared at it for so long because I was just like, this is crazy. Obviously I've seen like lots of art quilting and lots of like different images and things represented in quilting, but I just loved like that it's a like crazy experience up close, but the farther back you go, the more the image sharpens and the more you can kind of engage with what you're seeing. And
Yeah.
um yeah, did you know that that's something you wanted to make for QuiltCon, or were you just making it and were like, I think I'm going to submit this?
Um, with the complexity of my quilts and the amount of time that I get to spend on them, I usually get one, maybe one and a half done a year.
Okay.
So once I got the top done, I was and got the top all pieced together. I'm like, all right, yeah, this is good. This is good. I you know, little
Yeah.
pat on the back for myself. Like, okay, this
Yeah.
I like how this came together.
Yeah.
This is going okay. I could only screw it up in the quilting, which I kind of did. So
Well, I didn't notice, so.
okay. Oh my gosh, the quilting on that. Um it's just straight line quilting, but I think I ended up ripping like a quarter of it out because it got skewed.
Oh,
You put
yeah.
down the tape, I know you do all that stuff, and you still like
Still wonk.
veer.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, drive me nuts. And because it was so orthogonal,
Hmm.
I couldn't I the
There's no
initial my
lines to like follow.
well, and there my initial design thought was to go on the diagonal with the pattern, but then I
Yeah.
was like, if I veer off,
Hmm.
you're gonna see it.
Hmm.
So I'm like, I can't do that. I can't do that because I'm not confident enough in my quilting to do that.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, so I'm going to go in a way that if I do veer, if the line does shake, it's not going to be shaking off of, it's not going to get out of the ditch, so to speak. So
Right.
um, you're not going to notice it.
Yeah.
Um, but when it kind of veers off, then you kind of notice that. But so yeah, I ended up ripping a bunch of it out, redoing it. And
Oh.
so
You gotta do what you gotta do.
yeah. But this type of quilting that with the pattern and the image in it, there's a local Berlin painter. I've never seen his work in person, but I've just seen it on Instagram.
Okay.
Excuse me. And his name is Lee Wagstaff, and he does these paintings that are probably 24 by 36, maybe.
Okay.
and his is all painted, and he uses these crazy, crazy, crazy patterns, and brings out an image of a face through it and all that. And I'm like, well, this is really cool. Again, I bet I can do that. I bet I could make a quilt out of that.
Uh-huh.
So, but then like when I come up with these quilts ideas, it's like, okay, well, why do I do this? Why do I want to make a quilt that looks like this? So then I got to kind of dig a little deeper. Is like I've got to have a reason for doing this.
Hmm.
Um, and so I don't know how much you know about the piece, but so the image on the quilt is of my dad at 17.
Okay.
And he and my mother got a divorce when I was about 3 months old.
Okay.
He had always kind of lived nearby, but he was never a, a daily part of our lives necessarily.
Okay.
Um, and I talked at length about this in the podcast with Rachel,
Hmm.
and not a bad guy. He just wasn't there
Sure.
to the extent that like a father should be.
Sure.
And so when I was putting this piece together, I was with my son after daycare in the park and running around with him. And it had dawned on me. It's like, my folks never freaking did this.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute. What,
Hmm.
wait a minute, this, something's not right. Something's weird. So it really got me thinking, and this piece of this, the pattern over his picture, this perceived idea of what a parental person should be versus what they really, really are, or not what
Yeah.
they are, but what they, how they act and what they were.
Sure.
Um, and so, it's taken a while for me to kind of, I guess, come to terms with that,
Hmm.
yeah, biologically he's my dad and he was there, but he wasn't really a father, so to speak. So,
Right.
it's just some like, okay, so this is what I want to do. And the crazy thing is that with the reason why I chose that particular picture and not, one that's more current, um, that's his graduating high school picture and my
Mm.
graduating high school picture. It looks like we could be brothers. I mean, we
Yeah.
look very, very, very similar, and we have very much of the same mannerisms too.
Hmm.
But I never really grew up with him, so it's like he's very much a part of me,
Right.
but he's
Yeah.
not. So
Yeah.
it was this whole thing. So this overlying idea of my relationship, which is the pattern, onto his photo,
Hmm.
kind of understanding what that is. Um, so that was kind of the whole idea. It's like, okay, I can piece this together and I can write about that. And so that's kind of how that piece came together.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so I've got another one that I'm working on a pattern with, and it's not going to be as personal, but it'll have kind of like the same ideas behind it.
Sure.
It's this what we think and then what's reality type of idea. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, even that concept of like, I don't, do you know who Phil Stutz is? That he's like
Mm.
a psychiatrist in kind of like Hollywood, but he's got like his website, I think is called The Tools. And so he's got all these different like kind of therapy tools you can use to like work through some stuff. But he talks about the shadow self all the time. Like when you're your shadow self, that's the voice that tells you like the things that keep you from engaging in your life or keep you from
Mhm.
engaging with your relationships or keep you
Interesting.
from following the thing that your heart wants, you know? So it's like your shadow self is the self that tells you you're not good enough or people don't really want you around or you're not going to ever be good at that, so you should just stop trying. Like these voices we
Right.
hear in our heads and like maybe
Yeah,
they
yeah,
come
yeah.
from a person in our lives, but then also we internalize that and it turns into our
Yep.
self-talk. And so I almost was kind of like feeling that with your piece, like that shadow self of your dad, like he couldn't show up because there was shadows in his mind telling him that he couldn't be a good dad. And like, I
And
don't know, because I don't know the
uh,
man, but like I
no,
can
no,
only
no, but
guess.
that's a very good point. And there's generational trauma, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
for
there's this
sure.
whole idea of, our parents are dealing with what their parents threw on them.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
you know,
100%.
so, I mean, and I don't, you know, fault him or,
No, sure.
there's nothing
And
wrong. It's
you
it's
can
just
feel however you feel. I'm not here sitting here trying to tell you, but that's just like what popped in my head because
right, right,
like,
right. No, no, no. And and that's kind of it, is it kind of coming to terms with all this. And it's just kind of like, okay, nobody's in the wrong. It's just this is the way it is, and this is
yeah,
how we can and identify it in a sense.
yeah,
So
yeah. And the fact that you have an outlet to like show how that maybe feels from
mhm.
your perspective, like, I don't know, it's just so powerful and incredible to like gift that to the world, but also like and like allow people to take what they need from it because I think
Yeah.
that's what all great art does is it evokes emotion and it gives
Hmm.
people what they need from it. And some people don't understand it and they say stupid shit like I don't get it and you're like okay then move on. Like then it's
Yeah.
not for you, you know. But
Yeah.
for the people it speaks to, it's like it's really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was interesting having it hang at QuiltCon, and especially in such a prominent location.
Hmm.
Um, I have some people go, "Oh, that's so and so," and just walk on by, and it's like, well, no, you don't know who that is. It's You need to read the
Yeah.
thing and figure it out. And then there's other people that would, I mean, they would, I kind of, if I was near it and doing something else or whatever, I had one woman, she was reading the little plaque, and she turned to me with like almost tears in her eyes, and she's like,
Mm,
"I'm a child of divorce too," and just she was just like you could feel that weight on her, and just so it just gave her a
yeah.
big hug, and just you know yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting just how the things that you do, how they affect different people,
Hmm.
and what people take the time to really look at what you're doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's like you can tell the people who just like are there to see the pretty quilts and the people who are there to appreciate the art, even in the
yeah,
pretty quilts that are like,
yeah,
you know, because they're great, but also to like see the art and the vision that people put into the quilted art that they do make. And so that's
right.
it was like such an interesting experience because like I've only ever been to like my local quilt show that my guild puts on.
Oh, so
And
this
it's
was your first QuiltCon?
that was my first quilt con
Okay.
and like I got so sucked into all the vendor booths and I hung out at Ruby Star way too long and you know all the things. And so then finally my mom and I went through the quilt show and I think I was just like my flabbers were gasted by some of the things that people were saying. I was like, why are you here if you're so upset by everything? Like it was just
Gosh.
like I like a few voices in particular I just kind of kept hearing as we were moving through and it didn't matter what the quilt was, like, it could have been an art quilt, or it could have just been, like, you know, it was the kid quilt, or, you know,
Uh-huh.
something like one of the special projects, like the it wasn't the, like, color challenge, but it was like, purple, yellow, teal, like, those quilts in the back, kind of,
Okay.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
remember what
Yeah.
that was, but anyway, just, like, the things that these people were saying, I was like, "Get out of here, like, what are you doing here?" I don't know, anyway, that's just my personal piece about it, but anyway, um, yeah, I it was just so interesting, but so do you feel like making that was, like was there, like, some healing in that for you? Did it feel
Oh,
like it
most
was that
definitely.
kind of project or
Yeah. 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 Most definitely. I mean, I usually when I'm sewing and putting stuff together, I've got a movie on, I've got one of my podcasts on, and just kind of zoning out and doing, because I made, you know, like over 200 of these, little snail shell squares, and
Yeah,
it just gets really redundant. But at times it was like, okay, this is, because you got to think about what it is you're going to write about it. So
mhm,
it's really going over all this stuff and really trying to process it. And I think, the amount of time that I spent sewing that thing together really gave me the chance to really process, just kind of take
yeah,
in everything as much as I could from every angle, and just
yeah,
be like, all right, yeah, no, this is how I feel about it. And that's okay. And, you know,
yeah, it's
I
your
I feel,
experience.
yeah, I feel good about, and I'm happy with what it is, and it's, I'm
Mhm,
not bitter or mad or anything. So it gave me a place to really kind of digest it.
okay,
Um, but it was also interesting because So I'm the youngest of four.
Mm,
And so my brothers and sisters have all had them being all spaced out. They've had different experiences
yeah.
of with my father. So when I made it and I kind of put it out there, and I was kind of like not, waiting for the backlash, so to speak. But I knew nobody was
Yeah.
going to really say anything negative. But it was just be like, all right. My brother was like, all right, what's this about? And I was
You're
just like,
like, let
all
me tell
right,
you.
well. And so then my other brother's like, can we have a conversation? I really want to know what's going on. And da, 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 da. It's like, okay, okay.
Mhm.
So I sat down with everybody and we were just kind of talked it out,
Yeah.
and everybody understood, and everybody was like, oh yeah, you totally had a different experience than the rest of us. And that's, so
Yeah. What are this? What, like, what's the age gaps there?
um my eldest brother is 10 years older than I am, and then
Okay.
my next is my sister at 6 years, and then there's a brother in between the two.
Okay.
So
Okay. Yeah. There's
yeah,
like some big age gaps in my family too. So
yeah.
it's just like it is. My sister and I talk about it because I'm the oldest of four and she's the youngest of the four of us, and she's 15 years younger than me.
Wow,
So
yeah.
we just like talk about how we were just like raised with different people. Like my parents are different than her parents, even though we have the same parents. Like
No, 100%. Yeah,
we
yeah,
always
yeah.
talk about like I'm always like, well, you had a different mom than I did, or you had a different dad than I did. Like, I mean, clearly they're the same people, but it's just like,
But no, it's different experiences. And being
yeah,
a dad now, my daughter definitely has a different set of parents than my son does.
right. Well, you were
And
fresh at that point and like didn't know what you were doing probably and
and we
scrambling.
still we still don't,
I
even
mean,
with
true.
her. I mean, it's all
Yeah,
everything she does. It's as a new experience,
it's
and we have
new.
to
Yeah.
like, I don't know what we're doing, but we're gonna give it a shot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's so crazy. And just like
yeah,
informing your own parenting. And I like that realization you had in the park with your kid, like running around with them and just realizing like I'm doing something that was never done for me. Like
yeah.
that maybe, you couldn't because your parents split and your mom was busy working and your dad, like you said, wasn't really around. And
No,
so
that
it's just like,
exactly.
who was gonna do that with you? And your
Yeah,
siblings are probably like, ugh, little brother,
100%.
at
So
that
yeah, yeah,
point.
yeah.
So yeah, like who's gonna run around in the park with little Scott? Like,
Right.
so now you get to do that for your kids and like
Yeah,
show your inner child that acceptance and that love and that time. And
yeah.
that's so cool.
So
And like I love that for your kids because
yeah.
I think it's I think it's so I people talk about like, oh, my inner child this, my inner child that, but I think the work of like looking at your inner child, and this is going to segue into some mental health stuff because that's what I do. But just like that inner work of like talking to and like healing your inner child and really being present for that version of
Hmm.
you is so incredible. Like I think for me personally, it opened so much of my life up
Oh,
to
fantastic.
just like things that I was scared of or just like never saw myself doing or never thought I could do because of the messaging my inner child, like my little younger self got, growing
Hmm.
up. And so I think just seeing other people do things that kind of are healing their inner child, like gives me a little more healing. And like I think just
Yeah.
sharing that out is gives people a piece of like, no, look, you're not alone. Like we all of our experiences are unique because they're our own, but just like you're also not alone and somebody probably had something similar that they
Yeah.
can see themselves in yours and like sharing that burden or that feeling makes it lighter because we don't
Right.
have to
Right.
carry it by ourselves. And so I love that you were willing to share that piece of yourself and like show people like, look, you don't have to carry this by yourself. Like I've
Yeah.
got some too, and we can do this together. So
Yeah. Most definitely.
that's really awesome.
Oh.
Do you have anything hanging in QuiltCon for 25?
I will not.
Okay.
Rachel over at Crafty Monkeys got all my attention for the first part of this year.
Yeah.
So
Because you taught a class, right?
I taught a class. I taught a weekend Zoom class, and then I was also an instructor for her VIP classes, which is
Yeah.
kind of this year-long thing with like six other artists.
Yeah.
I ended up doing way too much.
Oh, Okay.
Uh,
Burnout?
no, it was, I was given a small task and I made it a huge giant building, and it made way too
Ah,
much out of it, and so it took me much longer, and does it, yeah.
yeah.
So, but
Mountain out
it
of
looks
molehill.
really cool, and I probably for she needed like 3 hours of video of me doing instruction, and I think I gave her like maybe like 6 or 7 hours.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. Um, but I have a show, the German Quilt Guild. After QuiltCon, the German Quilt Guild contacted me
Mm,
and asked me to be their like headlining artist, I guess, for their quilt show next year.
okay.
So I'm trying to get a couple pieces done. That's at the end of May. So I'm trying to get a couple pieces done before the end of May.
Okay.
Um, so we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. Cross my
Yeah.
fingers for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Um,
That's really cool though, and how fun that they're like recognizing your work and want to do it there and bring that
yeah. And
into.
it's kind of interesting because it's not the German Modern Quilt Guild. It's the older
Yeah.
kind of mainstay quilt guild, and they have a little bit more of conservative tastes, and
Okay.
so they're having me with all my crazy wacky stuff to show. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I think certain types of quilting can span that gap between the modern and the traditional kind of situation where it's like, it's just art and it doesn't matter if it's quote unquote
right,
modern or quote unquote traditional, it's art. And so
yeah,
that can transcend whatever labels we put on anything. And
right,
labels are arbitrary anyway, right? So
yeah,
I mean, I think that's like a muddy conversation to get into when you're talking about like quilt show judging and showing quilts and like you have to
yeah.
categorize them and you have to have, and I'm like, but it's all bullshit. No. Like at the same time as I'm like, quilt shows are amazing and it's so cool and you should
Yeah.
submit quilts and all this stuff. And then I'm like, don't do it.
Well, I mean, each one is different, which is
Yeah.
really kind of interesting, and yeah, yeah. So they all have their own, and depending on what country you're in, they've
Hmm.
got all kind of different ideas of what different things are, and so
Yeah.
uh, it's yeah. That's been interesting, but yeah, no, it's um, I was very happy that they asked me to do that, and they uh, they interviewed me for their quarterly magazine, and the when the second chairperson came up from I forget where she's from, but they took like trains up to Berlin to come and see all my work, and we had a nice
Nice.
conversation, and it was all very, very nice. So they've been very, very cool. So
That's incredible.
yeah.
And congratulations. Like that's a big deal. That's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun.
Nice. That's so
So
cool. Um, so as far as like fabric goes and like purchasing your what you need, is it like easy to find in Germany or do you have to order from outside
um,
of the country?
Berlin is kind of a quilting desert island.
Okay.
Um, there's only like a handful of people that really do like quilting type stuff here in Berlin. Um, and so I usually get my stuff online. There are there are a few fabric stores. But a lot of it is all very, I'll say hoity-toity in a sense that it's it's very upper scale fabric and mainly made for to make children's clothes with, or to
Okay.
make handbag, to make little
Yeah.
uh, I don't want to say accessories, but notion, to make, I don't know if notions is even the right word, but just to make, little things with. And
Yeah.
so it tends to be a little bit more expensive. All my stuff I work with Kona solids,
Okay.
and I can get those online fairly easily.
Okay.
So that's been good. Um,
I was curious just because there's obviously quilters in Europe and like overseas and in different countries, but like it's just interesting like how like starkly American it kind of is. And then when
it's
you
yeah,
branch out into the other countries or like try to find it in other spaces, it's like it's very different. And like even in Spain, like when I went to Barcelona 2 years ago, my husband and I were like specifically looking for quilt shops because I was like, I want to find one, you know, and he's like, well, maybe
Yeah.
we can interview somebody. And we did. We ended up interviewing a Bernina shop owner for the podcast. She was so excited. She's like, I'm practicing my English and my teacher's gonna be so proud of me. And like she was so excited. It was great. But anyway,
Oh, that's cute.
the experience is just so different because it's not like, you know, people don't have big homes with like large rooms to have studios, and it's like
Yeah.
it's very like practical. And you know, there were a couple cute little quilt shops around the city that was great, but it was like it's just so different. And it's fine,
Yeah.
like I'm not expecting the same thing as the US. It's just interesting to see how differently like different countries engage with the craft of quilting, the art of quilting, because it's like
Yeah.
pretty American. And then um Katerina Rochella is she's one of my most favorite designers, and just her, even her, she's like, I design for art gallery, but like it's so hard to get fabric here because it's not just like readily available like it is in the US. And so she's like
Right.
also having to order things while she's like also designing for one of the US's like largest design houses. And like, you know, it's like it's just so interesting. So anyway, I was just curious how that was for you. But um hopefully like with the globalization of quilting and like it being more visible online and stuff, like I think it would just be so, it's going to be wild to see what it looks like in 10 years. Like has it really like infiltrated even more, or
Right.
like is it different now than it was when you first moved there?
Um, maybe a little bit. Trying to think if I mean, I think the online shops are coming more there's becoming more of them.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, now as I say that, I think of like a couple that have just closed, but
Oh no.
um
You're like, actually.
actually um yeah, no, I honestly I think it's probably about the same, but
Okay.
it's just kind of because there aren't any like real there's a couple like quilting specific there's one that I can think of, quilting specific store, but it's on the other side of
Mm.
town. It'd take me like an hour to get there and you're still in the city.
Yeah.
um so it's like I don't get over there because I can get it in 2 days if I order it online from this. It's an online shop in Germany, so
Okay.
and I can get all the Kona colors, so it's just easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And when
So
And like you said, you only finish about 1 to 1.5 pieces per year. It's like if you're not mass
yeah,
producing quilts like some people do, it's probably
right,
you don't need as much necessarily, or you don't have to
right.
shop as often.
Yeah, I don't need bolts and bolts of fabric, and
Yeah.
so
You're like,
yeah.
oh, I'm out of this thing. I'm gonna just run to the store real quick. Like,
No.
oh
Well, even
man.
with this piece with from that I did with wait, was it that one? No, or else it was Shadow that I had run out of the one of the blues and had to. I was like, oh my gosh, I need it now because I've got to get the, I think I
Yeah.
got that one in like a week before the deadline or something like that. So I was really like cutting it close.
Yeah.
Um, so, but yeah, you get it quickly. So,
Yeah. That's good. I'm glad you found a source, because sometimes that's like you just don't know. Like, how am I gonna
right. And it's also trying to like, try this one once, try this one over here and try to see which one works best. And
Mhm.
um, I've got one that's I've got one outlet that's really close to Berlin, but they only cut in like half-meter lengths.
Okay.
So it's like, oh, I
That's
don't
a
know if I
lot.
want to. That's yeah. So the other one will do quarter-meter lengths, so I can get a little bit more precise with that. But if I need like a whole number then I'll definitely go to the one that's closer. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of depending on what I need and what other things I'm looking for. So
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, things are just different in different countries, right? So
I
you just
know.
have to kind of adapt to
Yeah,
how that works,
exactly.
and you figure it out. I mean, it's not like it's impossible. Everything's figure outable, and like you just have to be
Right.
willing to try and find how that's going to work. So
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
really cool. Well, fun. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really loved this conversation and getting to know you better and like
Of
understand
course.
your style, where it came from. And I
Well,
love
I
the
appreciate it. Thank you.
the upcycling thing. It kind of speaks to my heart because I love that. So it's great. And so for people who don't know where can they find you online?
Um, I'm mainly on Instagram, and even then I've kind of cut back, the stuff that I'm posting. I'm at Scott Culley Design, and then my website is scottculleydesign.com.
Okay, great.
So,
I'll put links in the show notes so people can get to you and go check out your work. And
fantastic.
yeah, well, thanks again, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you so much.